Hello and welcome back to the Don't Be a Casual YouTube channel. I am your host DJ, and today we will be covering my top 50 ranked wide receivers. After we go through my top 50 and I break it down using some stats, things like that, I will also address some late round flyers, sleepers, whatever term you prefer to use, that I found myself taking or interested in during best ball drafts near the last round or two. I just want to quickly address, I've had some problems uploading the rest of the running back videos. I will get to that when it is possible. I also will not be making as many videos as I had originally planned. That's why I'm covering all 50 today. So this will be a long video. I would like to attach my rankings with a picture of the order that they're in from 1 to 50, and then my flyers as well. I'm still figuring out the technology of it all, so I apologize if it is not perfect. We're going to get right into this because this will be a pretty long video. To start my list, my first three receivers are Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, and Cooper Kupp. Justin Jefferson doesn't need tons of explanation, but I should back up most of these people with stats, so it's not just a biased take that it sounds like I'm sharing. Last year, Justin Jefferson had 184 targets. Out of those targets, he had 128 catches, 1,809 receiving yards, and 8 receiving touchdowns. For the volume that he got, 8 receiving touchdowns does seem a little bit low. I think 8 is a good floor for him year after year, as long as he stays healthy. That's 1 every 2 games. And with the volume that he gets, his skill level, his ability to score and go up, catch the contested ball, things like that, he should score 8 touchdowns this year. I would actually think 10 touchdowns, like double-digit touchdowns, would be a very feasible mark for him to hit, especially now that Adam Thielen is gone. I like KJ Osborne, and I've heard good things about Jordan Addison on the field. But Justin Jefferson's obviously their alpha dog, so he should get the bulk of those targets as the best receiver on the team and arguably in the league. 1,809 receiving yards speaks for itself. That amount of volume speaks for itself. Most people have him as a consensus number 1 receiver, and I would be taking him 1.1 as well, over any of the running backs or any other player, unless it was a super flex or QB premium type of league. Next, we have Tyreek Hill in my rankings. I personally would take Tyreek after Justin Jefferson before any of the other receivers. Tyreek Hill, 170 targets last year, 119 receptions, 1,710 receiving yards, and 7 receiving touchdowns. A very funky stat about both Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle is they scored all of their touchdowns last year when Tua was healthy. It's been well documented that Tua Tagovailoa has had many concussions over the past few years, 3 specifically last year that were documented and that led to him missing time. That's obviously a concern. We hope that he's healthy. We hope that he gets better. Hopefully this offseason he works on whatever he needs to work on to stay healthy. I know he's done some sort of martial arts or jiu-jitsu training to work on falling, but really what it seems like to me is that he needs to get rid of the ball before he gets hit, because he, regardless of how he falls, the people coming to hit him are able to toss him around like a rag doll. And I'm not saying anything about Tua not being strong enough or anything like that. Tua is similar to my size. He's much stronger, obviously a professional athlete, but the people trying to hit him are half a foot to a foot taller than him, not a full foot, but half a foot taller than him, 100 pounds on him, some of them, and their strength surpasses his significantly. So tossing him around, especially when he's in a vulnerable position trying to throw the ball, will always happen. So he needs to get rid of it before that happens. And they need to protect him, hopefully, on the offensive line. But not all of those hits that he took last year were the offensive line's fault. A little bit of a tangent there, sorry, but assuming Tua stays healthy, Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle both should have monster years. They are the 2 leading receivers on their team. There's nobody else who really competes for targets, or rather will eat into their target share, I should say, because obviously other people have targets like Trent Sherfield. No, he actually is not on the last year. Trent Sherfield, had receptions for the Dolphins, but Cedric Wilson's still there, and some of the running backs might get some passes occasionally as well. Next, we have Jamar Chase. This is not the order I want to go in because Jamar Chase is not my third. Cooper Kupp is the wide receiver I mentioned. Cooper Kupp, as of 2 years ago, won not only Super Bowl MVP, but Offensive Player of the Year because he had ridiculous numbers. I don't have those numbers in front of me right now. I have his numbers from last year in front of me. He got hurt about halfway through the year. He had 98 targets at that point, 75 catches, which led to 812 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns in those games. So in half a season, he had 6 touchdowns, 75 catches, which is just a ridiculous pace. It was through week 9 or 10 that he got hurt. Really quickly, Justin Jefferson's yard per catch was 14.1, and Tyreek Hill's was 14.3. Cooper Kupp last year was only 10.8, but he is the only above average receiving threat on the Rams right now. The Rams' whole roster looks very bad, and if they have any chance at staying in and winning games, it will be Matthew Stafford throwing to Cooper Kupp pretty much every series, if not as much as he can, because they will not have tons of weapons or protection to really have a diverse offense. Next, let's go to Davante Adams. Davante Adams also has been a number one receiver at some point, the number one overall receiver at some point in his career. The first four people that I've mentioned, Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, and Davante Adams, all have been number ones. I've seen it before from them. I know what type of touchdown equity they have, the target share that they command, their ability to get open and separate from their defenders. They're not the only people. There's only a couple more people who have this ability in the league, where it's just anybody you match them up against, you feel like they could win, unless, of course, Sauce Gardner's guarding them. But there's my bias popping in a little bit. Davante Adams, though, there's a little bit of concern with Raiders' offense, similar to the Rams' offense. That's why these guys are not above Tyreek Hill or Justin Jefferson in my rankings. But as long as Davante Adams stays healthy, he will be the best receiver on his team. Jimmy Garoppolo, I wouldn't want him as my quarterback, but he's not a bum. He's a slightly above average quarterback who throws best inside the seams, even though Davante Adams does his best work everywhere and can really produce with fades, back shoulders, things like that. So that is a little bit of a concern, but I do think Jimmy Garoppolo will be able to get the ball to Davante Adams still, because Garoppolo is good enough and Adams will be open. Next in my rankings, I have at number 5, Garrett Wilson. Once again, I am a Jets fan, so if you feel like there's bias there, I understand. But Garrett Wilson is a superstar. You should see his route running, his hands. He won the Offensive Rookie of the Year last year for a reason, because he is that special. He's gone from quarterback play that was, you could be generous and just say suboptimal, to now, in my opinion, a top 2 quarterback of all time. I think Aaron Rodgers is only rivaled by Patrick Mahomes in terms of quarterback talent at this point in the history of the NFL. I know that people have arguments about the GOAT argument, legacy, things like that. I'm not talking about team accolades. I'm not talking about winning. I'm talking about football talent, arm talent, the ability to throw the ball where you want it to be at any point on the field. Aaron Rodgers is the best at that. The only person who has probably eclipsed him at any point is Patrick Mahomes currently, who is entering, if not already in his prime. I would have loved to see them matched up against each other, because Aaron Rodgers that won the Super Bowl against the current Patrick Mahomes would have been a light show for the ages. Garrett Wilson will be the number 1 receiver. The number 2 on the Jets is Allen Lazard, and I don't think he will be able to eat into any type of target share of Garrett Wilson's, because there's not tons of people on the Jets roster who currently command targets. I don't dislike Corey Davis or Mecole Hardman, but in terms of tiers, the only superstar or close to it is Garrett Wilson on this receiving roster, in their receiving room. And Garrett Wilson with Aaron Rodgers, who used to have Davante Adams and would pepper him the ball, get him tons of touchdowns. I think Garrett Wilson will be a Davante Adams type receiver this year. Notice, though, how I put Davante Adams above him. Davante has done it before. Garrett Wilson has not. And I don't want to be slandering Davante in any way, but I would not be surprised if Garrett Wilson, being on a better team than Davante and a better team than Cooper Kupp, a more competitive team, does have more consistent week in and week out production, even though Davante and Cooper could benefit from garbage time. So there's all that balancing, but I went with my first 4 with people who have shown me it before. At 5, Garrett Wilson. Number 6, I have Jamar Chase. I'm much lower on Jamar Chase this year than most people. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't go into Garrett Wilson's stats. Garrett Wilson last year had 147 targets, only 83 catches. Like I said, his quarterback play was not very good. It's not like he was dropping the ball all these times. These are off-target throws. Still had 1,103 receiving yards, and he only had 4 touchdowns. He had two touchdown games. One of those 2 touchdown games came in week 2 against the Browns with Joe Flacco at the helm, and the other 2 touchdown game came near the middle of the season against the Bears with Mike White at the helm. Zach Wilson played a lot of the games last year, so He did not have any touchdowns with Zach Wilson. I am very, very tired of Zach Wilson. I don't need to focus on him. I don't want to be negative about anybody right now. But I want him out of here. And as long as Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback on the field, I feel very good about Garrett Wilson's consistency and production. I think it will be elite level production this year. Sorry, back to Ja'Marr Chase. Last year, Ja'Marr Chase had 134 targets, 87 receptions, 1,046 receiving yards. He did get a little bit hurt last year. He was dealing with an injury for a little bit. That's not why I'm docking him or lowering him in my rankings. I just think that the receiving core as a whole is very good. I think their division is very good. And I think everybody knows you cannot let Ja'Marr Chase beat you over the top. And I'm not saying he can't catch and run and break down the field for whatever amount of yards is left. He is a very elite athlete. In terms of pure talent, I liked Ja'Marr Chase more than Justin Jefferson when they were both at LSU together. But I do think T. Higgins being in a contract year means that Joe Burrow will get T. Higgins the ball a bit more than he did last year. And I think that Ja'Marr Chase does not have the consistency or the floor week in and week out that some of these other receivers will have because of T. Higgins being there. I know that Jaylen Waddle, we'll get to him soon, is also in Tyreek Hill's receiving room, but the other people that I mentioned so far are the clear alpha number ones. And in Jaylen Waddle and Tyreek Hill situation, even though that there are the top two, Hill did define himself as the clear one last year. I'll explain why when we get to Jaylen Waddle. But those two were the bulk of the target share. They combined for over 50% of the targets for the Dolphins last year, which is not the case with Chase and Higgins because they also had Boyd getting involved. They also had Trenton Irwin when Chase was hurt or one of the receivers was hurt. They also had Hayden Hurst being involved, and Joe Mixon will catch passes out of the backfield. So there's just a lot going on, and it was the second pass heaviest offense last year, I believe. But I would not say that I have faith that Ja'Marr Chase will have the volume required to be an elite tier top 5 wide receiver in fantasy. So I put him right there at 6. At 7, Stefon Diggs. Stefon Diggs has had a lot of drama the past couple years. He has always seemed like he's going to create some drama. I always think about this video I saw a couple years ago when he was still on the Vikings. There's a reporter going around the locker room asking, who would you least want to date your sister? And everybody in the locker room said Diggs. And then they asked him, he's like, what do you mean? I'm a great guy. I'm not speaking to him, to his character as a person. I don't know him as a person. I'm not trying to slander him. But I do think that he can be a little bit of a headache to be around if he's not getting the ball. And I think that if you try to force feed him the ball, Josh Allen is not this pinpoint passer all the time where he will not turn the ball over. He still had, I think, 14 interceptions last year, 14 or 15, which is a big amount. A lot of interceptions. Stefon Diggs will get separation. He will get open. He's very good. He is the number one on his team very clearly, but I'm not convinced that he will have the same floor and ceiling as the previous people I mentioned. I would put him definitely in a tier with Ja'Marr Chase. And I do think Gabe Davis bounces back this year. We'll get to him later, but Gabe Davis was dealing with a high ankle injury all of last year from basically the beginning of the season, and he played through it the whole year. So I know that there's a lot of disappointment in regards to Gabe Davis, and I think he's a great person to get late now at much better value. I think he's going to bounce back this year. And even though he didn't have a great year last year, his overall production at the end of the season didn't look too bad. I think if he can be a little bit more consistent and run a little bit crisper routes, I think he could definitely be a solid to great wide receiver 3. And obviously within those boom weeks, really help boost your team. So I have Stefon Diggs at 7. So to recap so far, we have Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Davante Adams, Garrett Wilson. Then we have Ja'Marr Chase, Stefon Diggs. Following those 7, I've got A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown has a similar situation to the Dolphins receivers, the top 2, where it was a big 2 with A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith. After week 1 of last year, DeVonta Smith actually had pretty similar, if not better, production than A.J. Brown, even though A.J. Brown does get the edge in the touchdown department. This was tough for me to rank because I really like A.J. Brown. I really like DeVonta Smith, but there's lots of other great receivers. I gave A.J. Brown the edge. He's a little bit bigger, more physically imposing, but Smith will also go up and get the ball. Smith is also fast. Smith is not weak. He will not just fold or crunch from getting hit. They're both very great receivers, and I have them both as top 15 receivers. actually both as top 11 receivers. I really like what I think their usage will be. I think it'll be similar to last year. They will dominate the targets from the receiving room, and they will have good touchdown equity, even though the Eagles were very effective at rushing the ball. And by very effective at rushing the ball, I also mean scoring on the ground, as they led. Actually, they broke an NFL record if you include the playoffs for most rushing touchdowns in a season. So that is pretty great. I'm not saying that they will re-break a record, but even if they go from 36 rushing touchdowns to 30 rushing touchdowns, I don't think their receiving touchdown equity will differ all that much. If anything, it will go up, because 36 is a lot of rushing touchdowns. But since that QB sneak play is still legal, I do think there will still be lots of rushing touchdowns, especially with Rashad Penny and DeAndre Swift being brought in this year. I think the Eagles' offense as a whole will be a juggernaut again, even though they're in a tough division with some solid defenses around them. So A.J. Brown, I've got at 8. Let me quickly go back. I'm sorry, guys. I forgot to give you the stats for Stefon Diggs. Stefon Diggs had 108 catches on 154 targets, 1,429 receiving yards. That is 13.2 yards per catch. Also, Garrett Wilson had 13.28 yards per catch. Actually, slightly more rounded up, 13.3. Why not? Garrett Wilson had 13.3 yards per catch. Diggs 13.2. And then we just talked about A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown had 88 catches on 145 targets, 1,496 receiving yards, 11 receiving touchdowns, 17 yards per catch. So great yards per catch. You might think or might worry that efficiency will go down, and it might. But A.J. Brown is a very big play receiver because he's great at catch after run. He's great at contested catches. He will get separation when he's running his routes. I wouldn't be too concerned it will go down too much, especially since the offense shouldn't change a ton, and the running game is legit, and you can't just worry about the receivers because then they will run all over you and down your throat. Next, after A.J. Brown, we have Jaylen Waddle. So this is my first duo of receivers that you've seen both of them ranked. I have Tyreek Hill at 2. Jaylen Waddle's here at 9. Jaylen Waddle had 75 catches on 117 targets, 1,356 receiving yards, and 8 receiving touchdowns, 18.08 yards per catch. Absurd yards per catch, and you might be worried about that. But the year prior, Jaylen Waddle broke the rookie record for receptions in a season. He had over 100. And those are much shorter. Those are closer to 10 yards per catch. And then last year, he had 18 yards per catch. So whatever they need him to do, he's capable of doing, and at an elite level. Excuse me. My concern about Jaylen Waddle is the same concern that I had for Tyreek Hill. When Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle did not have Tua last year, neither one of them scored any touchdowns. Still, Jaylen Waddle had 8 touchdowns last year, and Tyreek Hill had 7 touchdowns last year, and that was in limited time from Tua. I think both of them could have 10 receiving touchdowns. They both will have great yards per catch. Tyreek Hill definitely has a more consistent role because when Tua was hurt, Tyreek Hill was still getting his receptions, targets, and volume was similar overall, and production as well. But Jaylen Waddle's numbers did see a significant decrease. This year, though, the backup quarterback is Mike White, and as a Jets fan, I saw a bit of Mike White last year. I actually do really like Mike White. I think he will be a great backup to have. I know he didn't have a great first preseason game the other day, but he can run an offense. He will be able to get the ball to your best 2 receivers because they will be open. He was able to get the ball to Garrett Wilson. I think these 2 receivers are on the same level of talent as Garrett Wilson, where a superstar, elite athlete who gets separation will catch the ball and make plays with the ball in their hands. So I'm not as worried about Tua's health as I would have been last year. That being said, we do hope Tua stays healthy because they will be best when Tua is healthy, and obviously brain injuries are scary, and we don't want any more for him or any type of injury for him. He's already had hip and brain problems, so you hope he stays healthy. Next in my rankings, I've got DK Metcalf at number 10. DK Metcalf had 90 catches on 141 targets last year, 1,048 receiving yards, and 6 touchdowns, average of 11.64 repeating. I like DK Metcalf. He's a great athlete, very physical, very big, very fast. He's not as precise a route runner as the elite receivers like the Cooper Kupps, the Justin Jeffersons, the things like the Davante Adams, but he's still going to get open. He's going to get separation. He's going to win contested catches. He led the league in red zone targets, I believe it was 2 years ago, and he will always be a red zone threat because he's a big body who's going to win those balls. But the Seahawks do like to run the ball. I like that their division is weak. I think that will definitely make sure that there are a few boom weeks that would already happen with DK, but I do think he'll maybe have some extra boom weeks because there's some weak secondaries on the Rams and the Cardinals. They'll play those teams a total of 4 times throughout the year. And I think that will help boost DK Metcalf's overall season points while he will still be consistent week in and week out. Jackson Smith and Jigba being added as a third receiver does not concern me for Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf's production. I think it just helps space the field a bit more, especially with how they utilize their tight ends and the running game they have. I think DK Metcalf will have the space and the opportunity, and he definitely has the talent to produce as a low-end wide receiver 1. Next, we've got at 11, DeVonta Smith. I already just covered a little bit about DeVonta Smith. After week 1 of last year, he had just as good of production as A.J. Brown. Last year, DeVonta Smith had 95 catches on 136 targets, 1,196 receiving yards, 7 touchdowns, average of 12.59 yards per catch. So he had 95 catches compared to A.J. Brown's 88. He had 9 fewer targets than A.J. Brown, so 7 more catches on 9 fewer targets. DeVonta Smith, however, did have 300 fewer receiving yards. So A.J. Brown had many more big plays, even though his volume was a bit lower. And he had DeVonta Smith had 7 receiving touchdowns compared to A.J. Brown's 11. I think both of them will be in for great years. I think as I've ranked them as both top 11 receivers, week in and week out, they should both have a consistent enough floor. 4 catches, I would think, 3 or 4 catches for like 60 yards would be their floor, I would think, most weeks. But I also think a lot of weeks they'll be closer to 6 or 7 catches and closer to 100 yards with the occasional touchdown for each of them. So I feel good about both Smith and Brown. At 12, I have Ceedee Lamb. I don't love how I'm feeling about the Cowboys offense going into the year, but I do know that they have enough talent as a team. Ceedee Lamb is a talented, very talented wide receiver. Dak Prescott, even though he's had some difficulties the past year or two on the field, I do think he'll bounce back. I think that even though they've said they want to run the ball more, they already were the 6th highest rush rate last year. So I don't think that they'll be able to run the ball a ton more than they did last year. I think they ran the ball quite a bit last year as well. So I think Ceedee Lamb will still produce. He'll be a fringe wide receiver 1 week in and week out. I'd feel better about him as your wide receiver 2, even though he's going as a wide receiver 1. And let me break down his stats really quick. He had 107 catches on 156 targets for 1,359 receiving yards, 9 receiving touchdowns, and that was an average of 12.7 yards per catch. Like I said, over 100 catches is great, over 1,350 receiving yards, great, and 9 touchdowns. Like, this is great stuff. I think he'll probably produce something similar to this again. There are, like I mentioned earlier, there are some good defenses in the NFC East, but I'm not really concerned about Ceedee Lamb's production dropping all that much. I know they did acquire Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks is a very good, very solid receiver, and Michael Gallup will now be a year removed from his ACL surgery. So he came back last year, and now it's even another year. So I do think they will have a little bit bigger roles in the receiving room than Michael Gallup of last year and Noah Brown of last year. So maybe Lamb's target share goes down a little bit, especially if they run less. His target share going down a little, combining with run more. Combining with passing maybe a little bit less could lead to like a 2 or 3 target per game drop, which would be really significant because last year he had 156 targets, but if he had 2 fewer targets each game, that would drop him all the way down to 122 targets, which would not be elite level wide receiver 1. So I am a little bit concerned about Ceedee Lamb, even though I do still think he'll get his. I don't think it will be a top 10 wide receiver level of production week in and week out. Obviously, he'll have some boom weeks because he's very talented, and some weeks, some receivers just have good matchups, and the quarterback's able to find them. Next, I've got Amari Cooper. I think the Browns offense will be very good this year. I think Deshaun Watson will bounce back. He did not have a good year last year. I will not be taking any of Deshaun Watson because I don't really agree with him being allowed back in the league if he was actually guilty of some of those things, which seems like he was based on his suspension, him having to settle, and I won't get into that too much. It's in the past. This is what it is. He will be on the offense for the Browns, so I won't let that affect how I view Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper, I do think, will produce at a fringe wide receiver 1, strong wide receiver 2 level of production, which would be one of his higher finishes, as he has never really, I don't believe he's ever been a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy. I do think this will be one of his best years because that AFC North, the AFC in general, is very tough. There will be shootouts. There will be great defensive games that are still high scoring because these offenses will be virtually unstoppable on the whole. Drive by drive, yes, people will get stopped. They'll have to punt and settle for field goals. But if I just list these quarterbacks really quickly, we've got in the AFC, Aaron Rodgers, Josh Allen, Tua Tagovailoa, Mac Jones. Mac Jones easily the worst of those four. Then this next division, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Deshaun Watson, Kenny Pickett. Then we've got Trevor Lawrence, couple rookies in C.J. Stroud or Anthony Richardson, and what's the other team? Oh, Ryan Tannehill. Not the strongest division there in the AFC South, but the AFC West makes up for it with, of course, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Russell Wilson, and even Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo sounds like the strongest fourth quarterback in any of the four divisions. You could argue Kenny Pickett will have a breakout year. I do think Kenny Pickett will definitely improve this year, and he might surpass Jimmy Garoppolo, but we'll have to see it before we just say it. So to get to my point, I do think Amari Cooper will be utilized frequently in every game. I know he has ups and down weeks very frequently, but I don't think that will be as frequently this year because Deshaun Watson, when he was most recently playing at his elite level before suspensions, was a top 3 MVP candidate on a 4 or 5 win team because he was that level of elite. It was ridiculous production. It was absurd. So if he gets back to that level, all the receivers in his receiving room will be, especially the top 2 receiving options in Amari Cooper and Elijah Moore, will be spectacular to have on your fantasy team week in and week out. Lots of touchdown equity. And obviously yards and catches. Next, we've got Jerry Jeudy. I think Jerry Jeudy's going to have a breakout year because I think Russell Wilson will bounce back. Really quickly, though, because I've done this too frequently, let me address Amari Cooper's stats. He had 78 catches on 132 receptions for 1,160 receiving yards and 9 touchdowns, an average of 14.87 yards per catch. 78 catches, you want that number to go up a bit. You want him closer to 100, if not at or over 100. I do think that will go up. I think they'll pass a bit more because Deshaun Watson's ability to throw the ball is absurd and spectacular. One of the best quarterbacks in the league, in a league with tons of elite quarterbacks. I think his numbers will improve upon that. So I would say closer to 100 catches, probably closer to 150 targets, if not even higher, 160, 170, and probably closer to 1,300 yards, probably hits 10 touchdowns. I'm really high on Amari Cooper this year. I do think he's going to play very well. Jerry Jeudy now, last year, very odd year, was hurt for a little bit. Obviously, the Broncos offense was kind of terrible in a lot of ways. Jerry Jeudy had 67 catches on 100 targets, 972 receiving yards, and 6 touchdowns. Three of those 6 touchdowns did come in one game, but that was in a game near the end of the season where Russell Wilson looked better than he did pretty much the whole rest of the season. So if Jerry Jeudy is going to be his preferred target, Jerry Jeudy is the youngest of his receiving options with the highest pedigree. So if Russell Wilson bounces back, if the Broncos offense and team bounces back, really it was their defense that was elite last year. So the offense was the problem. If their offense bounces back and Jerry Jeudy is the number 1 receiver and Russell Wilson looks like the Hall of Fame trajectory Russell Wilson that we'd seen prior to last year, Jerry Jeudy will be honestly a steal if he keeps going at current ADP. Lately, though, people have been realizing Jerry Jeudy might be the guy in this offense, so his ADP is catching up to where I would value him at. I do have him ranked as wide receiver 14. At 15, this will surprise some people maybe, I've got Tyler Lockett. I mentioned it with DK Metcalf, that Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, I'm not worried about their target shares with the addition of Jackson Smith and Jigba. I don't think Smith and Jigba will take away from either of their target shares. Because they needed a third receiver to produce last year. Marquise Goodwin filled that role at some point, and D. Eskridge as well. I think Smith and Jigba will just be the guy in that third role, and Lockett and Metcalf will still get their number 1 and number 2 respectively target shares. Tyler Lockett every year for the past 7 years, or 6 of the last 7 years, has been a top 15 or 16 receiver. I think he's going to do it again. I think every year people undervalue him, including myself. I have done this in the past. But Geno Smith looked solid last year, if not legit. He led the league in completion percentage. like I've said time and time again, the Rams and the Cardinals will be terrible this year, and I think that will lead to them, their opponents, especially their division opponents, being able to take advantage of that and get additional fantasy points in laughers, blowouts, or just high-scoring games that you don't see week in and week out in the NFL. I think the Rams and Cardinals will have 2 of the top 5 picks next year when it comes draft time, assuming they don't trade away their pick or something silly. And Tyler Lockett last year had 84 catches, 117 targets, 1,033 receiving yards, and 9 touchdowns. So over 1,000 yards, over 80 catches, 12.2 yards per catch. He does this every year, 1,000 receiving yards. Over 1,000 receiving yards, solid amount of touchdowns, good target share, good targets, good amount of receptions. I think he's going to do it again. So I think I got him right there at 15. Then after Tyler Lockett, I have T. Higgins. I do think T. Higgins will get a little bit more production and have a little bit more usage this year than he did last year. Last year, T. Higgins had 74 catches on 109 targets, 1,029 receiving yards, and 7 touchdowns, an average of 13.9 yards per catch. So he had a better average than Jamar Chase. He had 25 fewer targets. He had 13 fewer catches than Chase. And he had only 17 fewer yards. So, like I said before, I'm not as high on Chase. I know Chase missed more time with injury than Higgins did. But I'm not as high on Chase as other people. I'm higher on Higgins than most people. I think those kind of have some sort of correlation because the ball can only be thrown to one person on a play. And I think T. Higgins will have an increase in targets overall. He only had 109 last year. Therefore, I think he'll catch the ball more. He'll have more yards. And I do think he'll get closer to 10 receiving touchdowns. I think it'll increase from 7 closer to 10, if not reach 10. I like T. Higgins. I think he's very talented, and I think he'd be a wide receiver 1 on most teams. I think he's been underutilized with Jamar Chase there because Jamar Chase is also an elite talent, and Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase have that connection from college, which makes it easier. I understand why it happens, but I do think T. Higgins could benefit from being on a different team where maybe his talent would be seen as the best on the team. Next, we've got Mike Williams. Mike Williams, very boomer bust. I know. I have Mike Williams way higher than everybody else has Mike Williams. I understand this. I believe he's closer to 30 in ESPN's rankings. But I think Mike Williams is going to have the year of his career this year. I think Kellen Moore coming over to the Chargers is going to be the best thing for Mike Williams and that Chargers offense. I think it'll hurt Austin Eckler's production a bit, especially his touchdown production and his reception production. But I think Mike Williams will benefit most compared to anybody on the Chargers other than Justin Herbert from the offensive coordinator change. Kellen Moore wants to throw the ball vertically. He wants to throw the ball down the field into the middle, intermediate to deep parts of the field. This is where Mike Williams will thrive. I think Keenan Allen also can thrive. Keenan Allen's amazing as well. He's arguably, if not arguably, a Hall of Fame receiver. I'm a big fan of Keenan Allen, but I think Mike Williams' big body and his ability to win the ball that will be thrown perfectly by Justin Herbert, because he is my third best, most talented quarterback in the league. He just throws lasers. I love it. If you are at all unsure about Justin Herbert's talent, I want you to just watch the fourth quarter and overtime of the Chargers-Raiders Week 18 game that was basically a play-in game into the playoffs from 2021. You will not believe that the game goes to overtime. You will not be able to comprehend what Justin Herbert did. Make sure you look at the down and distance for the entire drive, each entire drive in the fourth quarter that they show on the highlights if you're not watching the full game, because amazing. Like, this guy is absurd, and honestly, I love him so much. If it was not for Patrick Mahomes, he would be in the playoffs year in and year out. But instead, he's with the greatest quarterback of all time in his division, which makes it tough when his team and his coach and everybody else seems to be sabotaging wins because they're always trying to do something too clever or be too aggressive, and somebody's always making a mistake that is not Justin Herbert's fault. People also forget last year, Justin Herbert in week 2 fractured his ribs. Throwing a football with fractured ribs, the cartilage healing, everything like that, I don't understand how it's possible. And he was still doing it at an NFL level. The year before, he was QB2, I think. He had 395 fantasy points or something like that. He's going to burst back onto that again as long as he stays healthy. And if not, Justin Herbert and Trevor Lawrence are my two quarterbacks who I think will take the biggest leaps compared to how they performed last year. And I think they're huge steals and great values in the drafts right now. Getting back to Mike Williams, I think Mike Williams will be the biggest beneficiary of Justin Herbert's bouncing back and Kellen Moore being added to the team. I think his usage will go way up. He'll get more targets, more efficient targets, have more efficient production, and score more touchdowns. Because last year, Mike Williams had 63 catches on 93 targets, 895 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He did get hurt a little bit, but Mike Williams in this new offense and with his talent level and the quarterback that's throwing the ball to him should have 90 catches this year on 140 targets and at least 1,200 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns. I think he's going to go off. I really do. I think he's a steal. I have him ranked at wide receiver 17, but I know that I don't need to take him as wide receiver 17 off the board. He is going, for my belief and how I've ranked people, he will be the biggest steal out of all the wide receivers, I believe, in the draft, if I can get him where he's currently going. And I don't think people will be reaching for him the way that I might consider reaching for him, because everybody's seen this boom and bust type of career that he's had, and it does concern me. And in previous years, I haven't loved Mike Williams as an option. I don't think I've ever had Mike Williams on any of my fantasy teams. This year is the year that I think he's going to go off. So if there's not a single take that you believe outside of this one from watching any of the videos that I put out, I wouldn't blame you. This is my first year being here. You haven't seen if I can be right or wrong or if my takes are good. But try to get Mike Williams when and where you can, because this is the year that he wins your fantasy league. Next, Terry McLaurin. I think Sam Howell is going to be a better quarterback than people realize. I think he can move. I think he's going to be able to throw the ball. I think Eric Bieniemy is a great offensive coordinator, and I think eventually one day he might be a great coach. I don't know why he doesn't have a coaching job. I won't speak to any of this. We'll see how he does as an offensive coordinator in a new team and go from there. I do think the offense will be good. I think they have the pieces, the talent, and I think Terry McLaurin has already produced he's produced good to strong to high-end wide receiver 2 numbers with suboptimal quarterback play throughout his career. Even if Sam Howell is just an average quarterback, I think the targets, the talent, and the opportunity will be there for Terry McLaurin to have a great year. I do have him as wide receiver 18. I'll go into his stats in a second, but I don't think he'll have the consistency or the quarterback play to put him in that wide receiver 1 category, even though in any given week he could have a big blow-up week. But they have a lot of options in that offense, and they don't have a quarterback that's been proven to be able to put on a light show and have these high-scoring shootout blowout type of performances where you can put up 30-plus points. It might happen at some point, but I mentioned it a few times, the NFC East has some very legit defenses, and he's got to play the Eagles and the Cowboys twice a year with 2 of the best defensive lines and just overall best defenses in the league. And the Giants' defense is also no slouch. They made the playoffs last year for a reason, and it wasn't because Daniel Jones was throwing the ball all over the place. Terry McLaurin last year had 77 catches, 120 targets, 1,191 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns, an average of 15.467 yards per catch. Over 15 yards a catch is phenomenal. Nearly 1,200 receiving yards is great. 120 targets is also pretty good. Even if he just has about 120 targets and 80 catches again, he can still put up very good numbers. I do think he doesn't have as much ceiling as a lot of the people we've mentioned so far, and that is in part because of the quarterback play, the weapons on their team, and the overall defenses that they will play. But I do like Terry McLaurin, and I don't think he is being ranked most places as wide receiver 18, so you should be able to get him at good value. Next, I have Chris Olave. Chris Olave, similarly to Garrett Wilson, is a great young talent. He was one of the other Offensive Rookie of the Year candidates. He had similar production to Garrett Wilson last year. Chris Olave last year had 72 catches, 119 targets, 1,042 receiving yards, also had 4 touchdowns, an average of 14.47 yards per catch. He's definitely a deep threat. He can get open. He's a great talent, great hands, great route runner. He's great. Derek Carr, I do think we'll be able to get him the ball. My concern about Chris Olave that I don't have with Garrett Wilson is Michael Thomas is coming back, and Michael Thomas has led the NFL in receptions. He actually broke the reception record in the most recent full season he was healthy. So I don't know exactly how the offense is going to look. I am worried about Chris Olave not having the elite level of target share that he would need to crack the top 10 or 12 wide receivers, especially once Alvin Kamara comes back. If they get him involved in the pass game as well, they have lots of tight ends they brought in. I don't know how much opportunity Chris Olave will have, but he will likely be the wide receiver one in that offense, even if Michael Thomas comes back and is very good, because Michael Thomas is older. He's not going to be as explosive, and he was never really a deep threat guy. So Chris Olave definitely has better boom potential than Michael Thomas, and better boom potential than most people maybe would expect if you do not watch tons of Chris Olave, because the Saints were not televised too much last year. They weren't very good. Next, I've got Keenan Allen. I've got two Chargers receivers in, near the end of my top 20, because like I was mentioning before, I think Justin Herbert's going to have a phenomenal year, and Keenan Allen, I believe, could be a Hall of Fame wide receiver. He is phenomenal, great route runner, very precise, great hands, keeps moving the chains. If fantasy football had a third down conversion point or a first down point, which I think first downs might be a setting somewhere, then Keenan Allen's value would shoot way up, because when you need a first down, you're going to look at him. Like Eric Decker from a few years ago, like some of the receivers that Tom Brady had when he was on the Patriots. When you need a first down, you look at Keenan Allen. He's going to keep the ball moving. He's great at intermediate routes, so he's also going to benefit from Kellen Moore being there. And he's just, regardless of his quarterback, he's going to produce, because he is great. He gets open, and the quarterback knows they can look at him. They could stare him down even, and he will not let the defender cut under his route, because he gets great leverage. He gets open. He presses things to where they need to be and make sure his quarterback has a place to throw him the ball, and he will catch the ball and come down with it. Hopefully he stays healthy. He has usually, and if he stays healthy, he has had some injury history the last couple of years, but if he stays healthy, he will produce at a very great clip, because last year he only had 66 catches on 89 targets, 752 receiving yards, and 4 touchdowns for an average of 11.4 yards per catch. Clearly by those numbers, you know he wasn't healthy the whole year, but if he can stay healthy, get closer to those 100 catches that he usually has, he should be great. It should be 100 catches, 1,200 receiving yards, 7 touchdowns, something like that. That would be phenomenal. All right, next we've got at number 21. So to recap so far, 11 through 20. DeVonta Smith, Ceedee Lamb, Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, Tyler Lockett, T. Higgins, Mike Williams, Terry McLaurin, Chris Olave, Keenan Allen. Here at 21, I've got DJ Moore. I think Justin Fields is going to take a leap this year. I think DJ Moore is a great receiver to add to help Justin Fields take that leap, because similar to Keenan Allen, DJ Moore can run good routes, get good leverage, get open, give his quarterback a spot to throw him the ball. This is exactly what you need as you're developing as a quarterback. You need somebody you can trust to win their matchup, so you can throw the ball on time, not have to take an extra hitch or wait till you see him break open. Because if you wait till you see a receiver break open in the NFL, that window is going to close by the time the ball gets there. These players are too fast, too smart, and too strong to let people just look forever and make a play. One thing that you want to see from Justin Fields this year in his growth is not only being able to pass the ball better, but not take unnecessary sacks. Similarly to how Tua needs to get rid of the ball, Justin Fields needs to throw the ball on time, or scramble at the appropriate times, or get rid of the ball to protect himself, depending on what the situation calls for. The difference between Justin Fields and Tua Tagovailoa is Justin Fields is an elite runner, an elite scrambler, and he's more built to take contact from the defenders that would be hitting him. He's a little bit bigger, stronger, and has been a rusher for a lot of his life and career in a way that Tua is not. So Justin Fields knows how to better take contact and provide like the impact to the defenders as well in a way that Tua doesn't usually. For DJ Moore, he had 63 catches on 118 targets last year and 888 receiving yards with 7 touchdowns. That was an average of 14.1 yards per catch. 63 catches on 118 targets is kind of terrible, and that doesn't sound like it's his fault. The Carolina Panthers quarterback play last year was not great. I don't want to slander anybody, but there's a reason that they traded up to get Bryce Young at the pick 1 overall. Bryce Young has been a very accurate quarterback in his collegiate career. Obviously, NFL is not college. Everybody's faster, stronger. Everything is more improved in terms of the people you'll see, the schemes you'll see, and just how things work. But we're not focusing on the Panthers anymore because DJ Moore is on the Bears. And I think even if DJ Moore does not get to the 70% of his catches, 70% of his targets are caught rate, even if it's closer to 60 or 65%, if he can end up with about 85 catches on the year, he'll be over 1,000 yards, probably 6 touchdowns. I think these are conservative numbers that I would say. I think he would be good value for you as a late back-end wide receiver 2, early wide receiver 3. That being said, this is contingent upon Justin Fields breaking out. And if Justin Fields really breaks out, DJ Moore could sneak into that wide receiver 2 consistently value. Excuse me, because he should be the number 1 wide receiver in the offense. So definitely we have to wait and see a little bit. If I had seen for a year Justin Fields be great and then they traded DJ Moore to this offense, DJ Moore would probably be closer to wide receiver 14 for me. But since I've not seen it yet, and because there's definitely the possibility that DJ Moore is closer to wide receiver 30 than he is to wide receiver 14, I put him here at wide receiver 21. Next, I have Drake London. I'm really high on the Falcons in general. I think they're going to play well this year. I like Desmond Ridder a lot more than most people do. But Drake London is their wide receiver 1. He and Desmond Ridder were able to connect quite a bit last year. The only problem was Drake London had 2 fumbles as they were trying to come back late on some drives that Desmond Ridder was leading. Drake London cannot fumble the ball. He's a wide receiver. He should not be having multiple fumbles in a season, let alone multiple fumbles I can recall as a Jets fan who didn't do a deep dive on him to have to remember that. So I hope for his sake he can hold on to the football. Let's break down his numbers a little bit here. Last year in general, though, the quarterback play, especially, it wasn't so much Desmond Ridder. Marcus Mariota was very off target, and they did not throw the ball very much as a whole. That's why I'm high on Bijan Robinson this year. I think they'll get him the ball, and I think that he'll get lots of touches and carries. But Drake London is going to be their leading receiver, and Kyle Pitts will be their leading receiver at the tight end position, and I think those two will lead the receiving options and target share. Drake London last year had 72 catches on 117 targets for 866 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns, 12 yards per catch. That's pretty good numbers. So 72 catches as a rookie, I like that. 117 targets is great. 866 yards, not 1,000, but that's a good number too. I think this year, if he gets to 85 catches or closer to even 100 catches, goes over 1,000 receiving yards, closer to 1,100, and gets 6 touchdowns, I think it'll be a phenomenal year for Drake London. I think his ceiling is even higher than that. I think that he will grow into that, though, because the same way Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson people have identified as legit stars in this league, Drake London is that caliber of first round top 10 pick receiver who's going to produce at an elite level, because that's just what receivers do when they're taken that high in the draft. Next, I've got Chris Godwin. I think Chris Godwin and Baker Mayfield will be able to connect quite a bit. I think they'll have to pass quite a bit. Even though Rachaad White, I like what he's going to have going on for him in terms of his touches and carries and volume overall. But but Chris Godwin and Mike Evans both, I think, are being undervalued this year, similarly to how DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett were last year. I like Chris Godwin more than Mike Evans, but week in and week out, Mike Evans might flip-flop with Chris Godwin. Also, if Baker Mayfield develops a connection with Mike Evans more, I could very easily see Mike Evans going into this spot here, and where I have Mike Evans in my rankings, Chris Godwin being in that role. But I just have a bias towards Chris Godwin, so I have him ranked higher. And I don't think that Godwin and Evans both will be the top 30 receivers they have been in their career, because I don't fully believe in Baker Mayfield and that Bucs offense to be able to pass the ball effectively and consistently and produce at the level that you need to be a top 30 receiver in this current NFL today. Last year, Chris Godwin had, obviously with different quarterbacks, 104 catches, 142 targets, 1,023 yards, and 3 touchdowns, average of 9.8 yards per catch. So the dink and dunk merchant, Tom Brady himself, is no longer there. So those 9.8 yards per catch will probably go up a little bit, because Baker Mayfield will throw the ball a bit further down the field, even though he will stay within the system because he wants a job and does not want to have this be his last quarterback contract, at least where he has the ability to be a starter. So he's going to do his best to not turn the ball over, to be efficient and to help them win games. And I think Chris Godwin will be the person you will rely on to do that, even though Mike Evans will still have a role. So I could see him once again being over 90 catches, close to 1,000 receiving yards, handful of touchdowns, with a little bit of room to do more, especially if they have to come back against some teams. But the NFC is weak in general. The NFC South doesn't have any established team that you're scared of. There's nobody who you're super worried will stifle them or be a problem in their division. And there's nobody that you also feel like they could take advantage of frequently, because they're one of the teams other teams are looking to take advantage of. Next, I have Christian Watson. I think Jordan Love will be a solid enough quarterback. I think Christian Watson will be the number one receiver in their offense. I think Christian Watson is very fast and has a lot of potential. I'm not completely sold on what his eventual ceiling will be. And last year we had limited sample from him. He had 41 catches on 66 targets for 611 receiving yards and 7 receiving touchdowns. He also had, for 14.9 yards per catch. He also had a little bit of rushing value, had a rushing touchdown. He is just a great athlete, but not the level of athlete that we would mention in the Tyreek Hill, Davante Adams, Cooper Kupp level territory. He's not the route runner that they are. He doesn't have the hands that they do. But you do hope to see some growth from him and Jordan Love, and he should be the number one. So that target share mixed with his talent should help everything come together for them. Next, I've got George Pickens. George Pickens, I think, is going to break out along with Kenny Pickett, and I think they might surprise some people. George Pickens had 52 catches on 84 targets for 801 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns last year. That's 15.4 yards per catch. I think he's going to continue to have a nice yards per catch. He's going to work downfield. He's going to make big plays, win those contested catches. He had that sick one-handed catch where he was falling back on one of those primetime football games. He's really just a phenomenal athlete, and I think will end up being the best receiver on the Steelers this year, even though Deontay Johnson will still have a role. I don't think Deontay Johnson is a big play guy. He obviously had 0 touchdowns last year. I think that'll bounce back up because of positive regression, but George Pickens will be their alpha, in my opinion, this season. And I think Kenny Pickett and George Pickens' relationship and ability to have that connection will be one that you will eventually be able to stack in fantasy, even if not this year, maybe next year is when you could start doing that. After George Pickens, I've got Odell Beckham Jr. This was tough for me because I think that the Ravens offense as a whole will be good. I'm hoping Lamar stays healthy. They're going to pass more. I think Mark Andrews will have a big season. I think Isaiah likely could be utilized a little bit more than he has been in previous years. He looks like a good receiving tight end as well. I like Zay Flowers as a rookie. He seems like he's going to be great, and I've heard great things. And he should fill a great role on their team. I like Rashad Bateman, but he hasn't stayed on the field. I know that he's been a little bit hurt too frequently, and I don't know what the relationship is like currently with him and Harbaugh. But Odell Beckham, if he is healthy, I think will be the most talented and most productive receiver for the Ravens this year. Odell Beckham obviously retore his ACL during that Super Bowl that the Rams won a couple years ago, but prior to that injury, I think he was on track to win Super Bowl MVP. So if he can bounce back and stay healthy and produce at a level that doesn't seem like his ACL is affecting him, I think that he could definitely produce wide receiver 26 overall production. He was hurt all of last year, so there's no stats on him from last year, but anybody who remembers Odell Beckham knows what type of route running and production he can put up on top of, his hands are phenomenal. He literally patented the one-handed catch over the head that, Drake has sung about and other people try to emulate, and honestly that put him on the map in a way that made him a household name. Next I've got Christian Kirk. This was tough for me. I'm going to list off these next 4 together. Christian Kirk, Deebo Samuel, Calvin Ridley, Brandon Ayuk. You'll probably notice Kirk and Ridley are teammates and Samuel and Ayuk are teammates. I struggled with ranking these 4 players because of the situations they're in. I think Trevor Lawrence is going to have a breakout year, and Christian Kirk was his number 1 receiver last year. But Calvin Ridley, I think, is a little bit better than Christian Kirk, and he's coming off of the suspension. So he's not coming off an injury. He's going to be fresh. He's a great talent, and he wants to prove something. I think week in and week out, I wouldn't know who to trust out of Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley. And week in and week out, I wouldn't know who to trust out of Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, because I'm not sure whether it's Sam Darnold or Trey Lance or Brock Purdy, which one of them is going to pass the ball to either one of these players more, who Kyle Shanahan's going to want to feature that week, and really what role Deebo Samuel is going to have, whether it's going to be as a receiver or a rusher or whatever is going on in that San Francisco offense. That combined with both of these two teams being in divisions where they're the best team, at least on paper, at this point in the year, and they have two teams that are in rebuilding modes, to put it kindly, with the Colts and Texans in the AFC South and the Rams and Cardinals in the NFC West. I think there's going to be a lot of inconsistency, up and down weeks, and these are people that I'm really fading because a lot of people are higher on them than I am for the most part, and I don't want to have to deal with, am I drafting this person this week? Am I not? I'm not going to break down their stat. I'll break them down, I guess. Christian Kirk last year had 84 catches, 133 targets, 1,108 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns, average of 13.2 yards per catch. Calvin Ridley hasn't played in a couple years, hasn't been with Trevor Lawrence at any point. He was with Matt Ryan most recently near the end of his career. It's going to be a completely different situation in a much more crowded receiving room. I'm fading pretty much every receiver on the Niners and the Jaguars this year. I would possibly take Zay Jones late because I think he could be value, only because he will have some boom weeks, but even that, you wouldn't know when to start him. He would likely be a buy fill-in. And I don't mind George Kittle or Evan Ingram as tight end targets because there's not many tight ends, and they do have good utilization over the course of a season, even though they are also inconsistent as well. Brandon Ayuk last year had 78 catches, 114 targets, 1,015 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns, average of 13 yards per catch. Excuse me again. And Deebo Samuel had 56 catches, 94 targets, 656 receiving yards, 4 receiving touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown last year, 11.7 yards per catch. Deebo was hurt a bit last year. You hope he stays healthy. But overall, 94 targets from Deebo and 114 targets from Ayuk. It's not, neither one of them has separated themselves in the 3 years that they played together, with each one of them dealing with various injuries at different points. Deebo Samuel had that crazy year a couple of years ago where he had about 300 fantasy points. He was a rusher and a receiver. I'm not sure what this offense is going to look like. I'm not sure who's even going to play quarterback every single week of the season, because I know Brock Purdy enthralled himself with the NFL world and Kyle Shanahan. But if he struggles and they go 2-3 to start the season and they feel like he's not performing in a way that gives them the best chance to win their division and eventually the Super Bowl, I could see them replacing him with Sam Darnold or with Trey Lance, whoever they feel like gives them the best option. And I think that could also lead to different receivers being targeted. So I'm sorry for kind of rushing through those 4 receivers, but I'm not drafting them unless they really fall. And I wouldn't want to have to deal with who do I start, who would I not start, if these people were my flexes week in and week out. So, just to recap, wide receivers 21-30, we have DJ Moore, Drake London, Chris Godwin, Christian Watson, George Pickens, Odell Beckham Jr., Christian Kirk, Deebo Samuel, Calvin Ridley, Brandon Ayuk. All right, next, we're going to go through these next couple slides a bit quicker, all right? Juju Smith-Schuster is my next receiver. He's going to be the number 1 receiver on the Patriots, and I think he will produce well enough to be a late wide receiver 3 or a good flex option. I think he'll have a good floor, not too high ceiling. I don't believe in Mac Jones too much. And the AFC East defenses with the Jets and Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed, the Dolphins, who they did lose Jalen Ramsey for a bit, but Xavier Howard is still a very good defender. And the Bills with a very good secondary overall and just solid defense. I don't think that it will be easy for Mac Jones or the Patriots throughout the year. I think the Patriots will finish 4th in the division, even if they do win 7 to 10 games. I don't think they'll win 10 games. I think 7 is a better goal for them. But they'll always play everybody tough, and Bill Belichick is one of the best coaches, if not the best coaches ever. So I would not expect blowouts, but I would not expect high-scoring, mega offensive production. Next, Zay Flowers. I think Zay Flowers, as a rookie, will come in and surprise people if they're not aware of him. I think he will produce. I think he will grow to be Lamar's favorite target as they move forward in their careers, because I'm not sure how long Odell will be with the Ravens. But Zay Flowers, I really like his value. I think I have him ranked at wide receiver 32, but he is ranked much lower than that. So you should be able to get him at good value when he does appear in your drafts. Mike Evans is next. I already discussed Mike Evans a little bit. I think that Chris Godwin will have a bigger effect in the Buccaneers offense than Mike Evans will. But Mike Evans, every year of his career, has had over 1,000 receiving yards, which definitely says something about his ability to produce. He's a big body. You can throw him up the ball and he'll win it. And Baker Mayfield very well may prefer him over Chris Godwin. I know that one of those two receivers will have some sort of production every week, if not both of them, but I don't trust Mike Evans' consistency as much and floor as I do with Chris Godwin. I know Mike Evans last year had a really rough month or two producing wise, and then had this big monster, like 3 touchdown performance that really salvaged his overall stats last year. His stats last year, he had 77 catches, 127 targets, 1,124 receiving yards, and 6 touchdowns. But like half of those touchdowns, at 14.6 yards per catch, half of those touchdowns came in one game, and that was like nearly a 200-yard game or something. It was like a crazy performance. That it didn't really help people. People who had Mike Evans had already not made the playoffs because it was like a late season performance. It was great if you had him or did a weekly best ball with him or weekly fantasy lineup with him, but I'm usually out on Mike Evans. I don't like rostering him usually because there's something about his consistency that I've never loved, even though he's been a consistent overall player every year, but he's just not my preferred target usually. Deontay Johnson, also not one of my preferred targets. I feel like he's had a lot of problem with drops. He didn't score any touchdowns last year, and his ceiling is not that high to me. He's a big intermediate route type of guy in the way Keenan Allen is, but he's not as good as Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen will catch the ball every time. He'll get open every time. He'll make that play for you. Keenan Allen scores a few more touchdowns than him usually. Deontay Johnson, to me, is going to move from that wide receiver 1 level of production in his own offense to wide receiver 2, because I think George Pickens will overtake him this year, and Kenny Pickett will prefer George Pickens over him. Deontay Johnson last year had those 0 touchdowns, like I mentioned, and he had 86 catches on 147 targets for 882 receiving yards, 10.25 yards per catch. 86 catches is great, but for only 882 receiving yards, it's kind of ridiculous. You need to get over 1,000 yards if you have 86 catches. For example, the person that was ranked behind him on the ESPN rankings, Tyler Lockett, 84 catches, 117 targets. So 30 fewer targets, only 2 fewer catches, and at 1,033 receiving yards for 9 touchdowns. So I know not all targets are the same, but Deontay Johnson's not somebody that I'm really targeting. I put Mike Evans and Deontay Johnson here because they're going to produce, and I'm not trying to be a hater, but I'm kind of fading those two guys. Michael Thomas, I'm higher on than most people. I have him here at wide receiver 35 because if he is as healthy as they say he is, which is the first time they've said he's healthy in about 3 years, like I said before, he led the NFL and broke the receiving record for receptions in a year in his last full year healthy. Last year, he had 16 catches on 22 targets for 171 receiving yards. That's 3 touchdowns for 10.68 yards per catch. I think he's going to be the intermediate route guy. He's going to help Chris Olave not get double teamed, help Chris Olave really thrive this year, and he should have solid production himself. I think he's probably going to be a value because he's currently ranked by ESPN as wide receiver 39. And I think a lot of people might be out on Michael Thomas because of how he may have hurt you last year. Next, Brandon Cooks. I think Brandon Cooks is a great addition to the Dallas Cowboys offense. I think he will help move the chains. He will continue to produce as he always has. Last year, he did not have 1,000 yards. I know he missed a couple games. He had 57 catches, 93 targets, 699 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns. And that was with a combination of quarterbacks that will not be starters long term. I don't dislike Davis Mills. I've actually had him on a dynasty team of mine. But I don't think he's the level of quarterback that will stay as a starter in the NFL at his current level of talent. On top of that, Davis Mills is not as good as Dak Prescott. That's not an argument. Even if they don't pass too much, Brandon Cooks should have a role because he is a great route runner. He's got good hands. He can get open and get separation. Next, Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis is going way later than this because of, as I mentioned earlier, his production last year was very disappointing. He had those 4 touchdowns 2 playoffs ago against the Chiefs. And then it was 3 or 4, I'm sorry. Either way, lots of touchdowns against the Chiefs in the playoffs. Really stood out, around 200 yards receiving. And everybody was high on him last year. So a lot of people, including myself, were excited to get him. He then had a very middling year. A couple up weeks, a couple boom weeks, but lots of bust weeks, which, leaves you with a bad taste in your mouth. Like, you're like, I don't want to reach for him again. But this year he's currently, when I made these rankings, or looked at the rankings, Gabe Davis was ranked 46th. He had 48 catches, 93 targets, 836 receiving yards, 7 touchdowns, 17.4 yards per catch. 17.4 is great. 7 touchdowns, also great from a wide receiver too. And Josh Allen is going to throw the ball. The AFC is going to be crazy. Josh Allen's going to sling the ball all over the field, and it should be very fun. If Gabe Davis is healthy and that allows him to run better routes, be more consistent, be more efficient, I think that'll be great for him. They did not go and get another wide receiver in the draft or in free agency. Stefon Diggs is still there as the number 1, but Gabe Davis should be the number 2. I do like Khalil Shakur. He might have a role this year. He was, I think, a rookie last year. But I don't think he'll take Gabe Davis's role. And if that happens, it would be later in the year. But that's someone to keep an eye out on in case Gabe Davis or Stefon Diggs gets hurt, or if you're in a really deep league. I didn't even mention Khalil Shakur in my late receivers because he's not usually drafted, and I don't think he'll have a real role unless somebody does get hurt or like somebody's really like disappointing in the production categories. But Gabe Davis, I'm really high on, and you should be able to wait a little bit to get him. He should be a late round value because I have him as wide receiver 37, which is about 9 places higher than ESPN's consensus at the time that I made this video. Excuse me again. Next, Elijah Moore. I mentioned earlier with Amari Cooper. I do think the Browns offense will be very productive this year. I think the receivers will really benefit from Deshaun Watson bouncing back to his elite level of production. Amari Cooper is number 1. Elijah Moore will be the number 2, working in and out of the slot. Elijah Moore is very talented. As a Jets fan, we did not utilize him correctly. I wasn't heartbroken to see him go, but I do think he will really produce and really be a great receiver to have. Last year was not a good year for him. Reading these stats will not convince you that he's great, but he is not even in the top 50. Yeah, he's not even in the top 50 of wide receivers that were ranked. I've got him at wide receiver 38, which means that you can wait on him to take him. If anybody is unsure about Deshaun Watson's ability to produce, you should go back to Houston, his last full year in Houston. Just watch his highlights then, look at his overall season stats, because he was absurd. And he was throwing the ball to tight ends, receivers. That was back when, what was his name? Willie Snead, I think, was on that team too. But Will Fuller, when he was not hurt, he was running down the field, catching these big passes for touchdowns, big chunks, things like that. I think Elijah Moore will produce quite a bit this year for the Cleveland Browns. Next, I've got Marquise Brown. I think somebody's got to be the number 1 wide receiver on the Cardinals, and I think it will be Marquise Brown. I like Rondale Moore too, but Marquise Brown last year had solid production. He had 67 catches, 107 targets, 709 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns, and 10.6 yards per catch. I don't think the Cardinals will be good. I mentioned this time and time again. Somebody's got to catch passes. They should be behind a lot. They should be throwing a lot. He's a good enough player. I think he'll get enough production. Honestly, he'll probably overproduce in terms of season stats. He'll be better probably than wide receiver 39, assuming he stays healthy. But I don't think his ceiling is that high, and I think his best weeks will be in the weeks where they're blown out and he gets lots of garbage time catches, which you can't really count on or rely on, in my opinion. Next, I got Adam Thielen. He's the first receiver on the Panthers that I've ranked. I don't know that Adam Thielen will be their best receiver in terms of production or talent even this year. Adam Thielen's pretty old now, but he is going to be consistent, a good route runner, and a good presence on the offense. So I could see Bryce Young being able to rely on him to catch the ball, and Adam Thielen to just get his catches, score his touchdowns. He's been a good touchdown producer in his career. Adam Thielen had 70 catches on 107 targets for 716 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns, which was an average of 10.2 yards per catch. That was production with Kirk Cousins when he had Justin Jefferson as his number 1. I don't know that he'll have necessarily the same production, but I do think Bryce Young will be the quarterback for the majority, if not the entire year, and I think he'll be able to get the ball to the receivers that get open, and that'll help him move the chains. And I think Adam Thielen is perfect for that. Next, so to recap 31 to 40, that's Juju Smith-Schuster, Zay Flowers, Mike Evans, Deontay Johnson, Michael Thomas, Brandon Cooks, Gabe Davis, Elijah Moore, Marquise Brown, and Adam Thielen. Don't be casuals, 40 to 51 wide receivers. Number 41, we've got Courtland Sutton. I like Courtland Sutton. I think the Broncos will bounce back. Like I said before, I think Jerry Jeudy is going to establish himself as that number 1 on the team. But Courtland Sutton is not a bum. He's a big receiver. He can go up and get it. He can score touchdowns. I think last year was terrible for the entire team. And I think Courtland Sutton, if the Broncos are as good as they should be, and if they play competitively the way they should with the defense that they have, Courtland Sutton will be a target that will be throwing the ball in first and second halves of games by a quarterback who should be on the Hall of Fame trajectory, assuming he can bounce back to what he used to be prior to last year. I don't think one bad year should ruin your Hall of Fame path. If he can bounce back, I think he will. I think Courtland Sutton will have a good year. Last year, Courtland Sutton had 64 catches on 109 targets for 829 receiving yards, only 2 touchdowns, and 12.9 yards, 13 yards per catch. 2 touchdowns, very disappointing. As a whole, though, there was this whole joke the entire year about Russell Wilson having more bathrooms in his house than he had thrown touchdown passes. And that joke went on for at least 12 or 13 weeks of the season, which is terrible. So Jerry Jeudy ended up with 6, I believe, and Courtland Sutton had 2. I think Greg Dulcich got a couple at some point. I really like Greg Dulcich, by the way. I know I haven't done a tight end video yet, but it was a very disappointing year for the Broncos offense, team, franchise, everybody involved. That's why there's a lot of turnover, and it looks a lot different this year. I think Courtland Sutton will produce. I think he will be pretty solid. I have him at 41. ESPN has him at 42, so I'm not saying you could necessarily get him at great value, but compared to some of the other receivers that ESPN has him ranked around, I like him more than quite a few of them. Next, I've got KJ Osborne. I have him over Jordan Addison because I've seen KJ Osborne produce at the NFL level before. I'm not saying Jordan Addison won't overtake him at some point because Jordan Addison does seem like an elite talent, but KJ Osborne's been in the system. He can block, so he should be on the field a lot. He will benefit from Justin Jefferson being on the field in the way that, and even Jordan Addison being on the field in the way that Adam Thielen benefited from Justin Jefferson being on the field. And I think that KJ Osborne is a forgotten receiver and somebody who can produce more than people realize. Last year, KJ Osborne he's not even in their top 50 either. So sorry about that. But KJ Osborne definitely is a solid fantasy wide receiver. I'm sorry I don't have the stats at the ready, but with so many receivers and so many stats to take, I only took the ones from the ESPN top 50. Allen Lazard is next. He'll be the number 2 on the Jets. I think Garrett Wilson is going to be the ball-dominant receiver on this team, but somebody's got to be the number 2. Allen Lazard has been with Aaron Rodgers for so many years. He's been a 1 and a number 2 with Aaron Rodgers, and I think he'll continue to produce at a good wide receiver 3, borderline wide receiver 4 level of production. I think it would be a very consistent, solid flex to have. 4 to 7 catches in a week, 40 to 80 yards in a week, maybe a touchdown here and there. Next, we have Jackson Smith-Njigba. I think that he will be the 3rd receiver for the majority of the year. On the Seahawks, I think Geno Smith will have a good year. As I mentioned with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, who I had both in my top 15 of receivers. I do think they will dominate in targets and volume and things like that, but I think Jackson Smith-Njigba is a talented enough player, and the Seahawks will use him enough where he will have a good, solid level of wide receiver 4 production. Jahan Dotson is next. I said it before as well when I was talking about Terry McLaurin. I like Sam Howell. I like what the offense could be, but they have lots of weapons, including Jahan Dotson. Jahan Dotson, when he was healthy last year, had quite a few big plays, scored a couple long touchdowns. And his stats, here they are. He had 35 catches, 61 targets, 523 receiving yards, 7 touchdowns, 14.9 yards per catch. So nearly 15 yards a catch, phenomenal. 7 touchdowns is great on 35 catches too. You are worried maybe a little bit about that, but he had really great big play. He's got that really great big play threat. Terry McLaurin also has that big play down the field threat. So I think that'll be exciting to watch if both those guys can be consistent and produce with Sam Howell. John Dotson, somebody who, if you are in like a keeper league or in a dynasty league, definitely would be a good target to go for. But Terry McLaurin will be there for a bit too because he just got that extension a couple years ago. I like John Dotson though. Next, Treylon Burks. DeAndre Hopkins is there now. I think DeAndre Hopkins will dominate. Did I talk about DeAndre Hopkins? Oh my goodness. That's pretty funny. Well, sorry about that. I will just move everybody down one. DeAndre Hopkins and Treylon Burks, I'll talk about them both right now. DeAndre Hopkins, very good elite receiver, will be in the Hall of Fame. Phenomenal hands, great route runner. He's going to be their number 1. That being said, even though the Titans don't pass the ball a lot, and I think this will be the last year they try to use Derrick Henry as much as they can, so they try to compete to win the AFC again, like they did a couple years ago, at least in the regular season, and then make a Super Bowl. I do think Treylon Burks will benefit from being the number 2, not getting that number 1 corner on him, and I think that could help him grow into the receiver that they want him to be. DeAndre Hopkins is on a 1-year deal. No, he's on a 2-year deal. DeAndre Hopkins. Sorry about this, everybody. Hopkins contract. DeAndre Hopkins is on a 3-year deal. No. One more time. Tell me the total, but not the years. There we go. 2-year deal, $26 million. There we go. So yeah, he'll be here for 2 years. So I do think he'll help Treylon Burks develop and grow as a receiver. I don't know that his usage will be so great that you could use him week in and week out, but he'll be a number 2 in a way that some of these guys we're going to get to soon will not be on their teams. Next, I've got Jakobi Meyers. Jakobi Meyers was solid last year with the Patriots. He's now with Josh McDaniels in Las Vegas. So he's going to be similar to the Patriots offense. I'm not super high on Jakobi Meyers. I won't have much of him this year. He had 67 catches last year, 96 targets, 804 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns, which is good for him because he went a long time without scoring a touchdown, and 12 yards per catch. I think he'll be solid again. I am worried about Hunter Renfrow coming back to his form. He had an injury-plagued year last year. Not sure what's going on. I could see Hunter Renfrow and Jakobi Meyers kind of cannibalizing each other's target share and production and being inconsistent with each other week in and week out. So I'm kind of fading Jakobi Meyers. I only really believe in Davante Adams in that offense. I don't think Josh Jacobs will be back. You don't want Jimmy Garoppolo as your QB in fantasy. So there's nobody else other than Davante Adams that I'd really take, but I do think Jakobi Meyers has the edge on Hunter Renfrow for now, even though that could flip. Once again, I'm sorry I did not rank DeAndre Hopkins. What I'm going to do is tell you, just give me 1 second, where I would put DeAndre Hopkins now that he's on the Titans. I would say I put DeAndre Hopkins probably in the Chris Godwin, Christian Watson, Drake London, DJ Moore range of early wide receiver 20s, because I just don't know what his usage will be like. I don't know how many targets and things like that he'll get. I'm worried because when they had A.J. Brown, they were underutilizing him too. That being said, DeAndre Hopkins is one of the best receivers the game has seen, and one of the best receivers easily in the past decade. So yeah, I would say probably around wide receiver 21, 22, that first set of the 20s. And then I'll move everybody else down accordingly. And then that leaves us now with Jordan Addison and DJ Chark Jr. as the next 2. I just mentioned Jordan Addison with KJ Osborne. I think Jordan Addison could eventually be the wide receiver 2 on this team. I don't know that it will be like that to start the year. It might be. But I do think KJ Osborne is the better blocker as of right now, and I think he'll be on the field more consistently. So more plays on the field leads to just more plays usually where you could benefit from being on the field if there's an audible or a play action where it's the same formation as a run play where you'd be blocking. Jordan Addison though does have great talent, and if he does get this number 2 role locked down with Justin Jefferson opposite him, I think he will definitely produce and definitely overshoot this wide receiver 49 projection that I have him at. Next, I've got DJ Chark Jr. DJ Chark was on the Lions last year. He had 30 catches on 52 targets, 502 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns, 16.7 yards per catch. He's a big play, deep threat guy. Maybe they use him a little bit differently in Carolina, but I do think he will have a similar role because Terrace Marshall, Jonathan Mingo, Adam Thielen are a lot of names you've heard as well this year, so he probably won't get too much consistency, but that boom or bust week or weeks will definitely, well, not definitely, they'll probably happen. I don't really know how comfortable they will be letting Bryce Young, wait in the pocket, wait for those deep plays to develop, but I think they have a good offensive line and a good team overall, so I think we'll get opportunities throughout the year. The person who I just had to bump out of slot 50 to move DeAndre Hopkins in was Quentin Johnson. I think Quentin Johnson and Josh Palmer, these are 2 people I'll talk about right now for receivers outside of my top 50. They would be great late round value. I really like Josh Palmer. I know they just drafted Quentin Johnston, and he is a first round pick, so they're probably going to use him. But Josh Palmer produced last year when he had the opportunity, not as much as you'd have liked him to, but enough where, I've got my radar out if he gets any time this year. And Keenan Allen has dealt with injuries, and Mike Williams have dealt with injuries in their careers, including last year. So if one or both of them goes down, Josh Palmer's somebody who's been with Justin Herbert, and I think could have some good chemistry with him. Quentin Johnson is a good physical talent, and I think he's going to learn the system along with all the other receivers this year with Kellen Moore. I think that just having a Chargers wide receiver on your bench as a stash is a great move, especially if they develop or carve out a role on the team or if there's an injury ahead of them. Other late-round receivers that I have and would consider are Paris Campbell, Hunter Renfrow. Hunter Renfrow I just talked about with Jacoby Myers. I could see him bouncing back and having a really good year like he did 2 years ago. Eventually, if not from the start of the season. I'm not really sure exactly who's going to be their number 2 to start the year. Probably Jacoby Myers since he just got paid. But I don't see why Hunter Renfrow's talent would completely disappear. It doesn't make sense to me. Paris Campbell had a very good year with the Colts last year on a team that was not too good and in a receiving room that not many people expected him to produce with. Not that it was a stacked receiving room, but he was not somebody who people were thinking about going into last year. He's fast. The Giants don't have any real established wide receiving options in terms of demanding targets and showing that they can produce with the current regime. So there's somebody to keep an eye out on. Rondale Moore is also talented, like I mentioned with Marquise Brown. I don't know what their ceilings would be, but somebody's got to catch passes, and he's quick. His average depth of target has not been great, but if he can get 5, 6, 7 catches in a week, run after catch, he might be able to produce for you if it's a deeper league, like I mentioned at the onset of this video. He's definitely somebody you want to keep around in case you see that he's producing and you don't want somebody else to have him if you could have used that depth yourself. Tyler Boyd is next. The Bengals pass a lot. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are in front of him, but Tyler Boyd is going to have 140 fantasy points as long as he stays healthy pretty much every year. He's still in his prime, and I know he's getting older as time goes on, as everybody does, but I wouldn't be too worried about him falling off this year. Similarly to Paris Campbell, Isaiah Hodgins, also on the Giants, he had a nice little role last year. He's the biggest receiver they have, and I kind of liked how he produced. I know it's not a household name by any means, but keep an eye out on him. Rashee Rice is a rookie, and Sky Moore is in his second year, both on the Chiefs. They have not had a definitive number 1 since Tyreek Hill left. Juju Smith-Schuster just left as well, and Kadarius Toney will constantly deal with injuries. I have not ranked or mentioned Kadarius Toney at any point. If Kadarius Toney could stay healthy and was used for over 50% of the routes that were available, if he was on the field for that, which he has not been with the Chiefs or really at any point in his career, if he could just stay on the field and run routes, he would be in the top 5 wide receivers for me. His talent is absurd. As soon as I saw how he could run after catch against the Saints when he was back on the Giants and against the Cowboys, he had this day where he had like 10 catches for 180 yards or something crazy. It was absurd. Watching him make defenders miss in a way that Lamar Jackson made high school defenders miss was crazy to me. So if he can ever just stay healthy and get the ball in his hands, I will be taking as much Kadarius Toney as I can. But he continues to get hurt, and I cannot say I believe that he will stay healthy until I see it at this point, because he's been hurt way too much in his very short career. So Rashee Rice and Sky Moore, if they can stay healthy, have Patrick Mahomes throwing to them, which maybe you won't know who's going to get the ball week in and week out, but Patrick Mahomes throwing to you gives you value as long as you're on the field. Terrace Marshall, I just mentioned with DJ Chark. He will also have Jonathan Mingo there, who's young, and a rookie even. And they will also have Adam Thielen, who I mentioned before. So there's lots of receivers. Nobody has any real established role, especially since Bryce Young is new. There's a new coaching staff, and all these receivers are Adam Thielen and DJ Chark are new to the team, and Jonathan Mingo as well. So Terrace Marshall's been with the Panthers, and there's been good things about him this offseason and training camp, OTs, things like that. We'll have to see it before we believe it, but keep an eye out on him. I mentioned Rashad Bateman earlier as well. I like Rashad Bateman. He's been hurt a lot too, but if he can stay on the field, he would have been the wide receiver 1 coming into this year just based on him being there with Lamar before, in a way that Zay Flowers, who is a rookie, has not. Odell Beckham, who was not playing last year and was a free agent signing, has not been. But I do think he'll probably not be the wide receiver 1 and maybe even not be the wide receiver 2 because of Odell Beckham and Zay Flowers' current health and ability to get reps with Lamar in a way that he's not getting. But we'll see how that unfolds. Any of the receiving options on the Ravens would be a good call to take if you get him at good value, if you don't feel like you're reaching for him, and if you feel like your roster has been constructed in a way where you could wait a week to see who's going to really establish himself as someone you feel like you could trust in your lineup. Excuse me. Once again, though, I'm sorry I did not rank DeAndre Hopkins earlier. I will go over his stats right now. He had 64 catches, 96 targets, 717 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns for 11.2 yards per catch. Remember, he was suspended, I think it was 6 games last year because of PEDs, but hopefully he's not on PEDs anymore. Doesn't get suspended again. And 11 yards per catch is not terrible. And in 10 games, he had 96 targets. So that's 9.6 yards per 9.6 yards per game. 9.6 targets per game. It's been a long video. 9.6 targets per game puts you in that wide receiver 20 range at the very least, even if there's very limited touchdown upside, because he's going to catch 7 of those targets pretty much every time, 6 or 7 of those targets. So 6 or 7 targets, 10 yards per catch, gives you 16 points of fantasy as a floor in a week, which is just phenomenal. That's great stuff. I believe in DeAndre Hopkins. I think he'll have a good season, and I'm sorry I did not rank him when I made these rankings. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm sorry it was so long. I'll try to break it down. I'm not sure exactly how to make like the marks where you can see when a new topic is starting. I also want to overlay this with my rankings like visually at certain points. I'm not sure how to do this, but I'll try to figure it out as I go. My next video will either be trying to re-upload the rest of the running back rankings that I wanted to do, but if it is not, then I'll go to tight ends. I'll go to quarterbacks next, and then I'll go to tight ends, and then I'll finish up the running back rankings. I probably will not do many more videos than that because time is running out on the summer, and I will not have much free time starting pretty soon, and I'm not trying to make videos and stare at screens when I could be enjoying life. So, sorry I won't make as many videos as I had planned. I hope you enjoyed these rankings and want to maybe take some of the things I've said into account. I know my rankings are very different from a lot of the rankings you'll see right now, but I feel this is the level of confidence I have in players, kind of in terms of how I think they should unfold. There's some people who I've ranked in my top 50 who I would avoid personally. I've mentioned those as we went. And there's some people who I've ranked much higher than other people have currently ranked. But hopefully I've given you enough reason and supported it with enough both evidence and kind of where I was thinking, where you can understand at least where I'm coming from. And maybe you think about it too, to see how this year unfolds. I would like to obviously be right in all of my rankings. That probably won't happen. But I do feel strongly, especially about my early first two slides, my top 20 receivers. I do feel strongly that these guys will have better years than people expected for any of those people who are maybe not as ranked highly by other people. And like, for example, Jamar Chase, I did have lower than most people because I don't think he's going to have that elite top 2, top 3 wide receiver ceiling that everybody thinks he will. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. I know I've said that a couple times. And I hope you come back for the next video for quarterback rankings. I'm not sure when that will be, but it will definitely be out before the opening weekend of football, or the week before the opening week, so you can see this for your drafts. All right. Thank you guys for tuning in to the Don't Be Casual YouTube channel. I hope you tune back in at a later date, and I hope that this has been informative. Have a good day.